We are joined by Robert Gregory, the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Jewish Association. Robert, welcome to Spectator TV.
Thank you for having me on.
You have written a piece for us this week on former Labor Senator Fatima Payman and the danger of identity politics. And I say identity politics, but in my opinion, Australia has descended into this rabbit hole of sectarian politics where our elected representatives no longer seem to be representing citizens bound by their geographic location, but rather the religion that they adhere to. Now, this is new for Australia. Are you concerned by what you're seeing play out in Canberra?
Very concerned, and you're right. The Fatima Payman case is the clearest example of many in recent times of this sectarian politics. I mean, Senator Payman, she's made a name for herself over Gaza, and I hardly think that's the number one concern of her constituents in Western Australia. That's just not why they voted for Labor when they elected her.
Well, I mean, Labor leader Anthony Albanese, he was put in a pretty tough position because he had no choice but to throw Payman out of the party. Labor is full of people with their pet causes that go against the Labor line, and Labor's very strict about their no dissent party thing. I mean, you wrote there that, Senator Wong had to she wasn't allowed to cross the floor and vote for same-sex marriage despite being in a same-sex relationship herself. So why is Senator Payman so special? Why are so many people considering her not being allowed to cross the floor and being expelled after she did some kind of massive calamity for the Labor Party when it's always been what they do?
Yeah, it's very strange. I can't recall another example where a Labor MP hasn't been thrown out or severely punished for crossing the floor. It just doesn't happen. As you mentioned, Penny Wong while being in a same-sex relationship, was forced to toe the Labor Party line and vote against it. And there's many examples like that. We know there's Jewish MPs in the Labor Party that may not agree completely with Labor's anti-Israel positions, but they haven't been given permission to cross the floor. So I have no idea why a special permission was created for Senator Payman, why it took so long for Anthony Albanese to act, and why in the end it wasn't him that threw her out of the party. She was allowed to leave. She quit.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is I think what we might be seeing here is what is far more developed over in UK politics, where we are seeing all these MPs and candidates defect from the Labor Party in the UK and run as open and proud Islamic representatives who don't even pretend to run for anything else other than Islam. That is how they put forward all their party policies. Now, that I'm not sure people really want to see their parliament filled with religious candidates rather than our normal sort of left, right, green. Like this, it's a very different sort of parliament. And do you think that, I mean, around the world, there are religious parliaments. Is this the way Australia wants to go? And are Jewish people concerned about what's going on here?
There's a lot of concern in the Jewish community and across Australia. People don't want to see political parties based on racial or religious lines. It's divisive. We could divide Australia into 100 parts, but I think we're much stronger coming together, united, and debating the issues, not debating based on cultural background, race, religion, separating into parties like that. It's not heading in the right direction.
Yeah, well, I mean, how long can a multicultural society survive when the primary culture, which is the Australian culture, is drowned out by the sheer volume of newly arrived migrants who have got their own strong culture values that are at odds with Western thinking? I mean, we had 1 million people arrive here last year, and most of them ended up in Sydney and Melbourne. And they've got these Labor and Greens university class who seem to believe that you can keep all seeing is words that maybe there should be a Christian right party that starts up to protect Christian values. And I mean, I'm sure the Jewish community could launch a Jewish party, but you can just imagine what the press would do if that was the case. How do we, what would the Jewish community prefer to see? How do you bring this back? Do we try and recover to a more economic standpoint? We had Hamas banners flying from Parliament House basically saying our parliament is conquered. How do we bring this back?
Well, I think the fact that Senator Payman was elected, as a religiously observant Muslim in WA, which doesn't have the largest Muslim population, that's proof in of itself that there wasn't an issue. There's no need for separate religious or racial parties. in our federal parliament, it's already very, very diverse. There's multiple Jewish MPs, there's multiple Muslim MPs. There's certainly no need to break off into smaller identity-based parties. So I think, we should be focusing on the issues that are important to Australians, which, as you said, are economic, cost of living. We've got a crisis going on right now. These distractions over race, identity, over a war overseas, it's not welcome. It's not what the majority of Australians care about, and it's not what the Labor Party, the government, should be focused on.
No, you're totally right. I mean, the reason we never talked about religion before in politics is because it was not the primary purpose of our politics at all. But let's have a quick chat about Parliament House and what was flying from the roof of it just the other day. Now, was that just a random protest that's inconsequential, or is this the kind of protest that's getting very serious? We've got security breaches happening and the types of things that are being flown from our parliament. I think someone said there was a red Hamas triangle there. Is this more serious than the press is letting on?
Well, it's serious for a few reasons. First of all, it is a security breach, as you mentioned. In recent years, we've seen over $120 million spent on a security upgrade for Parliament. And the fact that several people can go have their faces covered and climb onto the roof of Parliament seemingly unobstructed, it's very concerning. It's a threat to democracy. If they had been carrying weapons or explosives or anything, it could have been a much worse result. So that's a concern. Did they have inside help? Who knows? But you mentioned as well the red triangle, the particular symbol they unfurled. That's a symbol that Hamas, which is a proscribed terrorist organization in Australia, uses to identify targets before they destroy them. So to have that displayed on Australia's parliament, it's very worrying, it's very chilling. And we know these sort of threats, similar to the protests and the vandalism outside MPs' offices, these are having a chilling effect on democracy in Australia. MPs are worried. We know Anthony Albanese hasn't even used his own office in his own seat because of these violent protests outside. So it needs to be called out by all sides of Australian politics. Unfortunately, we see the Greens, which is egging these protests on, also egging on the vandalism of the war memorial. So we really need to see just more mature behaviour all around in politics.
Well, typically, despite Albanese saying, they need to face the full force of the law, we've heard nothing about the protesters since that point in time. We don't know who they are. We don't know if they were helped. There's been no word on the investigation, and a lot of the MPs expressed sympathy for this happening. I mean, can you imagine if the freedom movement had climbed up to Parliament during the COVID pandemic and hung banners off the side of Parliament House? It would have been Insurrection 2.0 Australia, end of the world apocalypse politics. But this is no, nothing really to see here when it's the Palestinian protesters. Now, just quickly before we go, there was a lot of news stories about what was happening to Jewish students at university level for the last couple of months following the terrible atrocities. That's all gone really quiet. Do you know if the Jewish students are feeling safe now, or is this just fallen out of the news cycle and people are still very concerned?
There is still a lot of concern. I think some of it may have been to do with university semester break. So there may have been a lot of students that haven't been on campus. But we're obviously concerned. We hear from Jewish students constantly who are afraid to wear their Star of David necklaces who cover them up, classes getting interrupted. We know particularly in Sydney, the University of Sydney are very disgracefully surrendered to radical Islamists who are heading the camp there. They've given them oversight over the university's investments and security. So that's a big concern. We know the Shadow Education spokeswoman, Senator Sarah Henderson, is calling for an inquiry. That's something we support. It's very important. But we think as students come back to campus, we're going to see more of this behaviour because it wasn't cracked down on in the beginning. There was weakness from the universities and weaknesses from the Albanese government, from the Education Minister, Jason Clare. So.
Yeah, you're so right. And look, just FYI, University of Sydney is not the only one. If you walk past the UTS, they've got outright communist symbols all over the place, and they're recruiting new members who know nothing about communism, but they sit there on their phones and they sign up to communism as if it's some kind of club you just randomly join. But look, I'm very supportive of the Jewish community. People have to keep talking about it. Talking is our greatest strength in this society at the moment to solve problems. So thank you so much for joining us here today on Spectator TV.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And that's all from us today. We will catch you next time.